If I could just interrupt for a minute. This entire process, as John mentioned, is meant to identify any potential impacts that would come from the project. Part of the meeting today is to identify what impacts or other areas of Greenville, places we should be taking a closer look at. I think the document that was pulled together is something we'll be reviewing, so just want to make sure that we understand the context for the meeting.
Sure, okay. Then let's go back and take a look at the revised PIP as it appears from the Department of Public Service. In a letter to John Harris, the Department of Public Service recommended changes that would address relevant requirements in the new Article 10 regulations. Why did your company fail to incorporate all the department's recommendations, or lacking a written explanation why it did not incorporate those recommendations? Do you feel that you've incorporated?
We endeavored to incorporate every comment and suggestion that DPS made to us.
Okay, so you're going to select which portions of their recommendations that you will incorporate?
No, I think we made a conscious and concerted effort to incorporate every comment they made. I mean, I thought we did a good job with that, actually.
Okay. Do you disagree with the department's suggestion that representatives and residences of adjacent municipalities, specifically Wolf Island, should be considered as potential stakeholders?
I think, you know, we just coming off, we're kind of deviating from what I think our agenda here was, but
we'll get back.
You know, I think it's you know, we're dealing with a foreign country. I think we're grappling with how much deference do we pay to a neighboring country and a process that is under New York state law. You know, but again, I think we took that suggestion to heart. I think we've actually reached out to Wolf Island to make information available to them, and you know, I think we're trying.
They did invite us to their meetings. Because I have a residence here, I got a letter in the mail saying that Stan Tech and all these people, we went over to meetings. And so that it was inclusive that way. Their communication to us.
And we notified Wolf Island of events that have been held over here as well.
Will you be providing us, as it asked for in the public, in the PIP, a list of the landowners as well as the adjacent landowners, or should I further say maybe the friendly neighbor agreements that you have?
In the preliminary scoping statement, we have to provide significant information on the real estate that is under contract. And then in the application phase, there's even a bit more information that will be provided. I mean, I think, I'm not certain at which point in the process you're going to have all that information, but that information will be available either in the PSS phase or the application phase.
That's all.
Will be from an illustrated standpoint rather than just a listing? Because it would be certainly very helpful for the planning board to, and I think all of our elected and appointed boards to be able to look at a map and see who is a leaseholder, who has a good neighbor agreement, and who does not, and see the juxtaposition of all these parties.
That may be the easy.
Just to clarify, I mean, we need to show which real estate we have under contract. Mm-hmm. I think we also have to be sensitive to individuals' privacy concerns and to the extent of whose name is going to be listed in a public document and made available. I mean, there's some limit on how much information we can just throw out there with respect to who owns what land and where. I know that that's information that you can research and is ultimately publicly available, but we have to certainly be mindful of contracts and
Well, at the same time, if we're gonna be held by residents in the town as partly responsible for any mitigation issues, it would be very helpful for us not to get blindsided by blindsided. It would be helpful to know who is what.
Well, I looked at it differently. We've seen for the first time several months ago, when Mr. Chandler came here to initially address both the town of Cape Vincent and the town of Lyme. We saw basically a location map as to where a lot of the structures would be sited. If we had to, we could, by supposition, create an overlay with our existing tax maps and figure out what parcels are involved. I mean, you located them with some degree of specificity already on a map. We've got a copy of that. So going forward, and I respect the idea that there are certain limits on the level of disclosure you have to make at this point in time, or will make at a point in time in the future. But to view the overall impact, we already have at least one document that was prepared by your client for public consumption that does cite these windmills. What I was going to recommend is just simply take tax maps that are available of the town and color code which tax parcels are involved. I don't care necessarily who the owner is, but you can outline by tax parcel what parcels are involved, and we can do the same, I guess, vicariously, but that would be helpful since you've got the information readily available.
It'd be more accurate.
And it would be accurate, yeah, it would be accurate. So that's something you could consider as we move forward. That would be helpful, not only, I think, for the siting committee, but also for those who will be participating, both from the town of Cape Vincent and the town of Lyme, because there will be participation, and there will be that request will be made. I want to go back to the opening comments that were made by Cliff Schneider and his reliance on a document that was admittedly, this comes to you today, is 22 pages long. And it does address, in large part, the adequacy or inadequacy of many studies that have been done heretofore, and not done by you. Bear that in mind. They weren't done by BP. They're done pursuant to the terms of other applications. And I question for both of you is after you've had an opportunity to review this in more detail, it's unfair for us to kind of put you under the gun right now. But I'd like you to, as Cliff indicated, the town's plural position would be that the adequacy of those studies really has to be looked at, because we have felt all along and have identified the prior studies as being inadequate in their scope and duration. Fair assessment. So I would hope that you would take this work that's been done by the town very seriously, because we're hoping for better clarity and better disclosure. And we would find unacceptable reliance upon flawed documentation that was offered before, because it's already been identified by third-party agencies as being incomplete.
Yeah, as some of the critics, and Mr. Schneider and Mr. Brown and Mr. Doctor, we've done an awful lot of research on the internet, and there are lots of people who will refute anecdotal evidence of adverse impacts. And the common theme is that there are no peer-to-peer evaluations of some of these studies. Well, I would turn the question around and basically say, can you provide, relative to the issues that are of concern to us, such as sleep deprivation, turbine noise, and infrasound, can you provide us with peer-to-peer empirical evidence that these adverse impacts do not occur? Because, some of the researchers say, well, it ends up being a nocebo issue. Well, that's kind of an easy way to deflect the issue. I mean, it's, for those of you who are saying, what is McSherry saying? Well, nocebo, right, you've heard of placebo. Nocebo is that because you've heard of, a landowner has supposedly heard of the potential for adverse impacts, they believe, whether or not it occurs, that it is occurring. And some of the researchers who have commented about Nina Pierpont's material have said it is because of the nocebo effect. And that's, you know, for those of us who spent plenty of time in graduate school, that's kind of a cop-out, just to say it's a nocebo issue. So I think if your stance is that there are no issues with sleep deprivation, then we give us the peer-to-peer reviewed research that sustains them. By the way, did you have some acoustical engineering work done just recently? Because we did find one of your units, and we understand there were 4 that somebody had put up, one off the Bedford Corners Road here for a period of a few weeks, I guess it was. Are you aware of that?
Yes, we had an acoustical consultant outside.
Okay. And his research covered what period of time?
I believe it was 2-3 weeks in span.
Okay. And that's, you've done graduate work?
Sure.
Okay. 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it's a good choice of time, because it's leaf off and it's quiet. But is the duration satisfactory? I don't, you know, when you get to do regression analysis and somebody says, what's the time frame? 2 to 3 weeks is, you know, it might get you an awful lot of questions.
Who was your consultant?
We've used Hassler for that.
Well, that's Associates was that. For the new study?
For a study.
For the new study was Hessler?
For a study that we're conducting.
Richard, is that ongoing, or is that just for a defined period of time? Is that defined period of time?
Defined period of time.
So you're not calling them, at the present time, you don't have any intention of calling them back?
It hasn't been determined.
Okay, all right. But you haven't made that decision yet. Any other comments?
I just say, if you're saying the purpose is to identify adverse impacts, the State Historic Preservation Office had identified adverse impacts on the St. Lawrence Wind Farm project. So if you're looking for that specific question answer, their letter was May 28, 2008, from Mr. Bonafide to Mr. Davis, saying that there were very clearly adverse impacts, not only on Cape Vincent, but the overall area from the turbines. I'd also like at this point to pick up that in the previous seeker reviews, there was a lot of frustration because some of the very clear criticisms by the state on different levels, the State Historic Preservation Office or DEC, just went nowhere. You know, these things just disappeared. So we hope that when they do talk about alternatives, you know, that you would take that seriously. Mr. Bonafide, for instance, was talking about moving the turbines, smaller turbines, fewer turbines, as well as, you know, putting up things that would block the view, which is kind of hard in this very relatively flat environment for something that big and electronic, particularly at night. But nonetheless, the fact that the prior review process had apparent gross weaknesses in it really would like you, and thank you very much for coming here today to get this input from us on what we think should be in a scoping document, but also that we are committed to be involved with the legal review process and would ask you to respect that and follow through on the analytical points that we're making. That they're not just things that are going to be shredded or suppressed.
I would add to that,